Today I wanted to go over my process of this chappell roan study, and like always the video is sped up, so this is in 3 times speed. In this study I decided to do some basic sketch lines. I'm not too certain if it helped because quite frankly I don't normally do them and I think the result was pretty similar, but I did notice that I'm not perfectly good at lining up proportions, so this was a good practice for sure. At this point in the recording I am using Clip Studio Paint's thin gouache brush, but later I do use my version of Clip Studio Paint's oil paint brush, and you can find that for free download on my Ko-Fi. I wasn't super careful with how I drew this and I didn't make very many guidelines, so you'll notice I do move around the shapes of the face quite a bit, or I redraw things. And that is because when I made this drawing it was like 10 p.m. and I told myself I needed to draw something before I went to sleep, because for some reason February made me incredibly miserable, and I say for some reason, but it was absolutely the lack of sun. So I didn't draw that much the entirety of the month, and that was causing some mental and emotional turmoil on my end. But I think I still took some extra time with making the sketch a little more accurate, if only because it does save me time later when I'm coloring. The more time and care you put into your initial stages of a drawing, the easier it is for you to puzzle things out later, and even if this is just a 30-minute study, there is no harm in taking the time to establish shapes and form pretty well in the beginning. When I do sketch a little more with detail, I do like coloring in the hair and the lips regardless of what they look like, and this is mostly because I like preserving sketches on a separate layer and looking at them later, so this is a good way for me to color key things. And for me personally, I just think it looks a little nicer to have some level of contrast in your sketch, even if it's very undetailed. I think it looks a little more refined, and if I were to just post the sketch randomly, I think it would draw more attention because of the higher contrast, so it's entirely an aesthetic thing as well. In case you missed it, I did just switch to my oil paint brush and I am going to start the painting process now. I like starting with a mid-tone, which is not always the best course of action. In this piece specifically, it was a bad idea because her skin in this is so pale because it's painted white, so I created a bad starting tone for myself and a bad comparable tone with the mid-tone. So near the end you'll notice all my colors are a little more washed out than they should be, and they do look a little bland. But of course that's the purpose of doing a study, so you can figure out where you're missing information and what you need to work on, and obviously one of those things for me is contrast and higher contrast ratios. I kind of love this part though because it really just feels like I'm filling in the blanks. I'm just comparing what I see on the image to the colors I put on the canvas, and then I'm just filling in some color shapes and blobs and hoping it creates the right shape. I do a little color picking here, if only because there's no real way for me to capture a metallic paint color, and sometimes it's just easier to see what the color is in the photograph and then adjust it based on what colors you've put down on your canvas. And this is not really the best way to do studies because it does remove your ability to understand color a little bit and color relationships as you create the color tones. But again, very quick study where I'm trying to just focus on other things and force myself to make a little drawing, so I'm not really bothered by it. It would have been smarter to start off with the hair and create that dark shape, because then I could use that as my darkest dark in the drawing, apart from the eyeliner obviously, but I did not do that, and therefore my colors did look pretty washed out, including the hair, which I did not make dark enough in this drawing. Our eyes will often fail us and make us think a color is more red or more bright than it actually is. And while I would absolutely describe this hair color as gingerish or even red, it's not actually that red. It's quite orange, and you should be using a brown and orange tone to create the colors, but I did not do that. I kept trying to use red, which inevitably caused some trouble because I couldn't go as dark as I wanted to because her hair really isn't red. Like in the primary color scale, it's not considered a true red. I think there are points in this video where you can detect that I was like, okay, I just need to keep moving forward. I need to give up on this certain spot. Like you'll notice I kind of abandoned the eyes because I needed to just move to a different section and continue working on the piece overall instead of focusing on a certain detail. My favorite thing about the oil paint brush is it has enough texture to give an interesting look to the painting, but it also blends really well. And of course that's because I changed the texture of the brush and adjusted some of those color painting settings. And so for me it really mimics the way I would use oil paint in real life, or mimics the appearance of oil paint when I use it on canvas, which is super appealing for these quick studies where I do want to move fast while also having good color usage. If you look at my little color wheel right now, you'll notice that I'm using quite a red-brown shade of brown. And looking at this now, like I said, this should be definitely more orange. Red should have just been used within highlights instead of the base tones, but I did instead use it for base tones. And I noticed it here, which is why I moved more orange, but at this point it was like either I erase everything or I don't, and just try to fix it the best I can. And when I'm screen recording my artwork, it is often for content, so I don't really want to do a lot of undos or huge erases of sections, because I don't feel like that serves an aesthetic purpose, which obviously can lead to worse drawings. It's a constant dilemma that I get to live with, but you'll notice here that I finally realized my lips were super far off the line they should be at, and so I moved them over. And that's like the beauty of using guidelines in your sketch when you're drawing. It really helps you line things up a lot easier. It's not a perfect tool and only works if you line your guidelines correctly, but it can really make a difference in your ability to assess the distance of objects close to each other or further away from each other. I do feel like her Cupid's bow and her overall lip shape is very specific and particularly useful in creating a likeness to her face. And this is true for her nose as well, and I do go in and fix the shape of the nose later. You'll notice that I try not to zoom in for the majority of what I'm doing, even though I am now using a smaller brush. I will zoom in upon doing smaller details like the eyelid here or any type of color variations that require a finer eye, or even if I'm really just trying to match up a line really specifically. But overall, zooming in super close to an image can often lead to you not seeing it very well and creating random spots that just don't look correct, and it ruins the cohesion of the drawing. At this point, since I'm already zoomed in, of course I will go and do a little more detailing. I think I already established in my own mind that I did not feel like doing that much detail on her makeup, and it's easier to spot a few things when you're a little more zoomed in, so that's where I go in and fix them, like with the shading on the nose. With these studies, I try not to go into too much detail because they really are an exercise in how much I can capture under a limited period of time. And additionally, as a person, I don't necessarily like going into hyperrealism or any territory of excessive realism. Personally, I think it's quite boring, but even if I didn't, it would be too tedious and take too much time to do constantly, so I do not do that. And if you pay attention, I'm using that red brown tone again, which I should not have been using. It's not so much that it looks bad, because it doesn't look bad, but it's not an effective understanding of the color that's actually there on my end, and it therefore skews the coloring of the rest of the drawing, which is not a huge deal because it looks cohesive on its own, but when directly compared to the reference image, it does look completely different. And this is the point where even during the study I was like, okay, let me just do final touches and finish this and go to bed. When you're doing a study, you're always going to see things that you wish you had done differently or things you had wished you'd done better, but you're also on a time limit, so you don't have all the time in the world to fix everything or redraw everything or redo any of your sections. So you kind of just have to move forward and keep a mind on it for the next time you do something like this. And that's part of why I like studies so much, because you just have to accept the failures as failures. Like, all studies are inherently failures. Like, they're explicitly training exercises, so you're not ever going to make a full-fledged piece that looks good with them. And this is not to say that this looks bad on its own, but when you look at it, it's clearly unfinished, it's clearly not referencing anything larger, and it's not exactly a fantastic piece of artwork. Like, it's clearly just a referenced piece of art that doesn't have anything to say about itself and doesn't stand on its own. But I did learn things while doing it, and I think that's definitely more important than saying it's a good or bad piece of artwork. And it's also a mindless way to create something, which can often be a good way to get back into creation if you've stepped away from it for a while or haven't done anything particularly intense in a while. It is at this point where I am really just creating final touches, filling in some blank spaces, doing some highlights in the hair. I don't normally paint out hair in depth. It's one of those things which I do think should just stay lumps and maybe some indications of shadow and lighting. If you look at older European paintings during the Renaissance and Baroque era, there was a lot of detailing done, but a lot of the hair details have been lost to either time, varnish, or poor restoration. And those are my favorite styles of paintings. And oftentimes I don't think they even really emphasized hair. It was really a background item. It didn't have a huge focus within the painting. So I've never really considered it something important, and I don't really enjoy drawing it. But you can really see me do some final detailing now. It's like small brush strokes, nothing really major, maybe just small shape fixes, small color fixes. And that's about it. Thank you so much for watching.